The night Trent Sterling laughed at my mother's accent, I was already recording him. Not with my phone out in the open or anything dramatic like that. I'm not that obvious. But there was a small voice recorder in my clutch, wrapped in a silk scarf, already running before we even stepped into the Sterling estate. And the reason it was running wasn't because of that laugh. It was because 3 weeks earlier, I discovered something buried in a land trust filing that had my mother's name spelled wrong, and our family vineyard circled in red ink. My name is Ember Andes. I'm 32. I practice environmental and agricultural law in southeastern Pennsylvania. My sister Hannah is 27, soft-spoken but sharper than most men in boardrooms. And my mother, Eliza Andes, is the reason I understand both silence and strength. If you're new here, this is where we tell the stories that sit in your chest for a while, the slow burn ones. The kind where patience does the heavy lifting and truth shows up dressed better than revenge ever could. So if you've ever watched someone underestimate the wrong woman, you're in the right place. And yes, subscribe to her Untold Revenge before you forget. You're going to want to be here when this unfolds. Now let me take you back to that night. The Sterling estate sits on 200 manicured acres in Chester County. Perfect hedges, limestone fountain. The kind of place that smells like imported candles and quiet judgment. Mom wore her cream wool coat, the one she only pulls out for weddings and funerals. She'd curled her hair. Light makeup. Pearl studs my dad bought her at a flea market in 1983 because he thought they made her look like royalty. She looked beautiful. Not flashy. Not polished like Rosalind Sterling, but grounded, real. Trent met Hannah 9 months before that dinner. He worked for Sterling Land and Development, his father's company. Old money, generational influence, connections at the state level. The kind of people who donate to campaigns and sit on advisory boards nobody elected. From the first Thanksgiving he attended at our vineyard in Berks County, he asked questions that didn't match a man in love. How old are the vines? Is the conservation easement permanent? Have you ever had offers from developers? He asked those while smiling at my mom like he was tasting her apple pie for the first time. And Mom, God bless her, thought he was just interested. I didn't. Our vineyard is 62 acres. My grandfather planted the first rose in 1952. My dad expanded it. Mom kept it alive after he died through hailstorms, fungus seasons, and one particularly brutal year when we lost 40% of the crop, and she still paid her 3 workers before she paid herself. The land sits along a proposed state bypass corridor that's been whispered about for years but never confirmed publicly. Until I saw that filing. 3 weeks before the Sterling dinner, I was researching a routine zoning issue for a client when I stumbled across a newly formed LLC, Keystone Corridor Holdings. The registered agent? A paralegal firm used frequently by Sterling Land and Development. The listed future acquisition interests? Multiple agricultural parcels along Route 724. One of them described as Andes acreage 60-plus acres. Vineyard, partial conservation restriction. They had spelled our last name wrong. A tiny clerical error. But it was enough. That's when I started digging. So yes, that night, the recorder was already on. Dinner began with champagne flutes and thin smiles. Rosalind air-kissed Mom's cheek and said, "Eliza, darling, it moo. Stay be such a change of pace for you out here." She gestured vaguely toward the chandeliers like Mom had arrived by horse. Mom smiled. "It's pretty, but I prefer soil under my nails." I saw Trent's jaw tighten just slightly. That flicker, that irritation when a woman refuses to shrink. Later, near the bar, I stepped away to take a call. Instead, I stood just beyond a velvet curtain dividing the music room from the terrace. Trent's voice carried. "Once the bypass is announced, property values spike. We secure majority stake through marriage and partnership, push a partial release on the conservation clause, and flip the frontage for commercial rezoning." Then a man laughed. I recognized Whitfield Sr.'s low rumble. "And the sister?" he asked. "She's cautious," Trent replied. "But Hannah's sentimental." And their mother, he paused, then chuckled. "She still thinks legacy matters more than leverage." That was when he laughed about Mom's accent. Said something about country vowels in marble halls. My hand didn't shake, not then, but I knew. I didn't tell Mom that night. I didn't tell Hannah yet either. You don't throw a grenade without checking wind direction. Instead, I went home and built a file. Over the next 4 months, I pulled every corporate registration tied to Sterling subsidiaries, cross-referenced campaign donations with zoning approvals, filed 3 right-to-know requests regarding preliminary bypass discussions. What came back was limited but telling. A transportation impact study commissioned privately by Sterling Land and Development. Not public. Not yet. Hannah noticed my distance. One Sunday afternoon, she came over to my place in Reading with a grocery bag of Thai takeout and that crease between her eyebrows she gets when something feels off. "Ember," she said, setting noodles on my counter, "if I ask you something, will you promise not to lawyer me?" "No." She laughed softly. "Fair." Then she got quiet. "Trent wants me to sign into a partnership structure after the wedding. Says it simplifies estate planning." I leaned against the sink. "What structure?" "Joint spousal holding company. He'd manage it. Majority share." I nodded once. "And the vineyard," she says it's an asset worth protecting. There it was. Asset. Not home. Not heritage. Asset. "Hannah," I said carefully, "has he mentioned the bypass?" Her face went pale. "How do you know about that?" "Because I read what men like him write when they think nobody's looking." That night, I showed her the filing, the LLC, the land map, the proposed rezoning sketches with little retail blocks drawn where our south vines grow. She didn't cry. That's the thing about my sister. People mistake quiet for fragile. It's not. It's containment. "What do we do?" she asked. "We let him think he's winning," I said. From that point on, everything changed. Hannah played the role beautifully. Engagement photos in golden hour light between vineyard rows. Bridal shower at the Sterling estate with pastel roses and polite laughter. Mom smiled, smiled and smiled and smiled and smiled. And behind the scenes, we documented everything. Trent got careless. He left draft partnership agreements in his home office. Hannah photographed them. One clause required transfer of inherited agricultural holdings into development-ready entities within 120 days of marriage. Translation? Once legally tied, he could pressure release from conservation restrictions under family strategic restructuring. It was almost elegant in its greed. I contacted Maya Caldwell, an old law school friend now working in federal land use oversight. We met at a coffee shop in King of Prussia. I laid it out carefully. Not revenge. Fraud. Manipulation. Pre-announcement. Insider positioning. Maya listened. Quiet. Focused. "If he's leveraging undisclosed infrastructure plans for acquisition advantage," she said, "that's federal. Can we prove it?" I asked. She gave me a look. "Can you?" I slid the recorder across the table. The wedding was scheduled for October 18th. 2 weeks before, the state quietly finalized bypass routing. Not public yet, but finalized. Trent grew almost giddy. Once this is announced, he told Hannah one night recorded again, because she'd learned to leave her phone face down but recording wheel be positioned perfectly. "Positioned?" she asked sweetly. "For generational wealth." He never once said love. The morning of the wedding, the sky was impossibly blue. Mom stood on the vineyard porch before I picked her up. She looked smaller somehow in the autumn light, but steadier. "You sure about this?" she asked. "No," I said honestly, "but I'm sure about us." St. Andrews was filled, 200 guests, strings playing something classical and forgettable. Hannah walked alone down the aisle, always her choice. Trent beamed. Whitfield Sr. looked satisfied. Rosalind dabbed non-existent tears. The officiant began. When he reached the part about lawful objections, silence stretched. Then Hannah turned not to the priest, but to the guests. "I need to clarify something before proceeding," she said, voice steady. Trent's smile faltered. She held up a slim folder. "This partnership agreement requires transfer of my family's vineyard into a development entity contingent upon infrastructure announcements not yet public. Murmurs. Whitfield Sr. stood. "Hannah, sit down." She didn't. "My fiancé has been positioning our land based on insider knowledge of the Route 724 bypass." The back church doors opened. Maya stepped inside with 2 federal officers. Trent's face drained of color. Whitfield barked something about defamation. Maya calmly presented documentation. Communications, impact studies, strategic memos obtained through subpoena after my preliminary filing. Turns out, they pressured a transportation analyst for early routing confirmation. Conspiracy, insider manipulation, attempted fraud. In the middle, DDLE of the aisle, in a tailored gray suit, Trent Sterling realized he wasn't getting married. He was getting indicted. Mom didn't speak when officers escorted Whitfield out. She just watched, hands folded, pearl earrings steady in afternoon light. As Rosalind passed our pew, mascara streaking, she whispered, "You've ruined us." Mom looked at her gently. "No," she said. "You did. We didn't go to a reception. We went home." Hannah changed out of her dress and walked the vineyard rows barefoot before sunset. She stopped at the south edge where retail sketches once imagined concrete. "They thought this was leverage," she said quietly. "It's legacy," Mong replied. The bypass was publicly announced 3 weeks later. Routing adjusted northward after community review. Sterling Land and Development entered federal investigation. Investors pulled out. Licenses suspended. Trent eventually pled to reduce charges. No prison but barred from land development for a decade and financially gutted. Whitfield faced heavier consequences. Rosalind moved to Florida. And our vineyard? Still there. This spring, Mong replanted a small experimental block where the soil needed strengthening. Hannah started studying for law school. Land use, obviously. I still practice, still fight. But here's what I learned. Revenge isn't loud. It isn't screaming in marble foyers. It's patience, documentation, knowing exactly when to speak and choosing the room carefully. If anyone ever underestimates your mother, or your sister, or you, let them. Then build your file. If this story sat with you, if you've ever watched someone mistake kindness for weakness, share this video with someone who needs the reminder. And subscribe to her Untold Revenge. We don't rush justice here. We let it ripen. And when it's ready, we serve it cold.